Want to ensure your app developers can create secure and smooth login experiences for your customers? With Curity, you can protect user identities, secure apps and websites, and manage API access. Find out more at curity.io.
Hello and welcome to the InfoQ podcast. I'm Daniel Bryant, Director of DevRel at Ambassador Labs and one of the co-hosts of the InfoQ podcast. Today I had the pleasure of sitting down with Alexander Matyushentsev, a principal software engineer at Intuit, and we explored topics such as continuous delivery with Kubernetes, the practice of GitOps, and the Argo projects. Although continuous delivery is not a new practice, several new approaches to this in the cloud and Kubernetes ecosystems have emerged, one being GitOps, where infrastructure and app config state is defined in version control and automatically synchronized with the target cluster, simply speaking. Extending some of the ideas around CD is the concept of progressive delivery, which focuses more on releasing strategies, seeking to maximize feedback and minimize any blast radius if things do go wrong. Here we have topics such as blue-green deployments and canary releasing. The Argo family of projects are a series of CNCF open source tools that enable continuous delivery, GitOps, and progressive delivery on Kubernetes. The target users are developers, and the projects aim to simplify the Kubernetes developer experience and the corresponding workflows. Alex is a core maintainer of two Argo projects, Argo CD and Argo Rollouts, and I have learned a lot from reading his blogs over the past several years. I was keen to chat with him and understand the motivations for creating the tools, the current state of the projects, and where he sees the community taking these tools in the near future. So hello, Alex, and welcome to the InfoQ podcast. Could you introduce yourself for the listeners, please?
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Alexander Matyushentsev. Don't try to pronounce my last name. I usually prefer to go just by Alex M. So I'm a principal software engineer. I work for Intuit, and I'm a maintainer of Argo project. And basically, Argo is not just one project. There are four. And I used to work pretty much on each and every one, I guess. But my primary focus right now is Argo CD, the continuous deployment tool for Kubernetes, which follows GitOps methodology.
Brilliant. So as you mentioned, we're definitely keen to dive into the Argo ecosystem today, particularly Argo CD and rollouts, and we can definitely focus on CD a bit more. Before we do, could you provide a high-level overview of the problem space and perhaps the motivations for why the projects were created?
Yes, sure. I guess it's pretty much true about every Argo project. So our team recognized that Kubernetes is an awesome platform, but it's so generic so that it's not really trying to solve any particular use case. And that's why, it's extremely powerful, but at the same time, the end user experience is not really the best because you have so much choices how you can do things. And Argo trying to just solve the most common use cases in an opinionated way, but, it tries to make user experience as best as possible. And typically by end user, I mean developers, because we believe that developers are supposed to, interact with Kubernetes and use it. And so that, we're trying to create tools that make developer life easier as possible.
Argo projects, they're open source, they're CNCF as I understand it. And unlike, say, other projects, there's no commercial entity behind it because you work for Intuit. I see a lot of BlackRock folks working on it as well. There's no one company that controls Argo.
Yes, that's true. So Argo was born in a small startup company, which was acquired by Intuit. And since then, basically, I don't think there is any commercial entity. No, like Intuit definitely not trying and not going to try to sell it. And that's why the project was donated to CNCF. And I think it's fair to say that CNCF controlled the project. And there are several end user companies like BlackRock and Intuit maintain and contribute to Argo, as well as there are several vendor companies like Red Hat and Codefresh. So, and they also a big part of the community.
Brilliant. Yes. I always like to understand where the communities come from and where it's going. I think the CNCF is doing a fantastic job, right? There's plenty of choice in the CNCF ecosystem.
Yeah, I feel like having both type of companies brings a lot of value. End user companies can contribute a lot of knowledge because basically end user companies have users right next to developers who develop the project. We learn about real problems from real users. But at the same time, end user company is not making money on a project. And that's why you need some help. And we were really, grateful when Red Hat joined the project. It really changed the pace. And now project is doing, I feel like, way better. Yeah, we have more people looking at issues and answering questions. So that helps a lot.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So diving into the project sort of individually now, when we look at, say, Argo CD, what's the role of that project in comparison perhaps with all the other Argo projects too?
Basically, the project was created at Intuit, and we were trying to solve a kind of upcoming pain. We were trying to onboard potentially several thousands of developers onto Kubernetes, And we knew that these developers has almost no Kubernetes knowledge. And basically that set a lot of limits to, basically we needed a tool that end users don't have to install, because you cannot ask someone who has no Kubernetes knowledge to install something into Kubernetes to manage Kubernetes. It would be too much. And basically we were just trying to build effectively web-based application that helped developers to manage Kubernetes. Actually, there was no goal to build anything. We're just supposed to get something. And we looked at existing set of solutions. We looked at Spinnaker. We looked at Flux. And then we really like the model of Flux. We understood this GitOps concept, and it was really, compelling to us. We didn't want to reinvent, auditing solution. Git would solve it for us, and so GitOps, we like it. At the same time, we didn't like that end users supposed to install and manage Flux. So we kind of steal that idea, and then we look at Spinnaker, which is kind of completely opposite solution. It's very heavy and it's like provided as service. And we tried to merge this into one project, and this is how Argo CD was created. And I think so basically idea that Argo CD provides you GitOps functions as a service. And it has web user interface, which is very important because it's maybe the most friendly way to end users to expose these features.
Yeah, I've been using Argo CD for, a number of months now, a year, probably more. And the UI is fantastic just for understanding what's going on, particularly when you're changing things in the cluster. The UI is really useful, yeah?
Yeah, the UI is totally influenced by a number of questions in support channel. Every time we're noticing the same question is asked again and again, it eventually made it into a feature in the user interface. You cannot imagine how many times we've got a question that, how come my pods are not starting? And that's why we had to create these red badges that are visible on the UI. And every time, if user click on a pod, you would see a tab, which is events tab that show Kubernetes events. And it has this popping red badge. It kind of asking user click me. And if user click on that tab, there will be an answer. So every time UI is changed, it's to simplify life of support people of a platform.
I like that a lot. Because just for the recap for the listeners, so the GitOps principles is we declare our configuration and store it in Git. And then something like Argo CD synchronizes that with a target cluster. So I could do kubectl apply using a command line tool and apply. And then if I wanted to understand what was going on in my pods, I could do, kubectl describe, etc. But Argo CD not only does the synchronization part, and I don't need to do kubectl apply, but to your point, it makes it easier to understand and look around the cluster visually.
Yeah, that's right. And I think maybe we were supposed to set context and explain what GitOps is. I kind of assumed people know, but it's fair. It's not really. GitOps is this old idea about, storing things in Git and use it as a source of truth. I don't think it's extremely new. It's been there for decades, at least. I think a lot of pre-Kubernetes tools were effectively doing GitOps, but I think Kubernetes made it so simple. Basically, you have all the tools to do GitOps built into Kubernetes. And I'm pretty sure Argo is just trying to build on top of that, and it's trying to improve user experience as well as any other tool on top of Kubernetes. And, we have project managers. They hate when I give that description, but we internally call Argo CD and every Argo project as some glorified feature of Kubernetes. Basically, Argo CD is glorified kubectl apply.
Nice.
It's just kubectl diff, kubectl apply packaged into a web application.
I've never thought about that. Like that is actually a very marketing friendly pitch there. I think I like it a lot.
It's totally not friendly. Basically, it kind of makes the description of tools sounds like it's not very important, but basically it explains very well what it's doing. And we have similar description for every Argo project. So Argo Workflows is a glorified Kubernetes job, and Rollout is glorified deployment. So yeah, we just identified use case, which is not solved extremely well on Kubernetes, and then build on top of it and try to provide opinionated implementation.
How does Argo Rollouts complement Argo CD?
So Rollout was created after Argo CD was created and adopted at Intuit. And we realized that GitOps is not really friendly to complex deployment processes. It shines if you just need to run kubectl apply, and that's it. And then Kubernetes take over and kind of finish the deployment for you. But what if you have a sequence of steps? And we did several attempts. So we tried first to just commit many changes into Git. Deployment would look like you commit stage number 1 into Git and then wait for the sync process to be in sync. Basically, wait for Argo CD to sync the changes, and then step 2 and step 3. And as you can imagine, like no one liked that. The next attempt was to just try to have one stage stayed in Git, but maybe use some kind of scripting. And we tried to just script this process in Jenkins. And it was not perfect either because you would have to give Jenkins pipeline access to Kubernetes or whatever CI tool you're using. So it was not perfect either. And then it was kind of clear it's really hard to do it in Jenkins because the deployment process could take like days. What if your intent is to have a canary that runs for 1 day and then you take measurements and so on and so forth? So it was kind of clear it's not the best choice. And finally, we realized that maybe that logic should not be living outside of the cluster. Maybe you want to put it into the cluster. And so we tried to compare how is normal canary deployment different from built-in rollout deployment. And it was kind of almost the same, except you just need few more configuration knobs. And basically that inspired us to create a custom resource, which is almost like deployment, but it has few more features, like more complex deployment strategy. You can pause it and resume. And so that's why I think the best way to describe rollout, it's just a replacement of deployment resource in Kubernetes. And it provides exact same set of features plus additional deployment strategies.
Makes it nice and easy to do, say, blue-green deployments, canary. You can say step 1 is 20% of traffic, pause for a certain period of time. You can also, more advanced use cases, do things like analysis, I believe, as well, where you can perhaps call out to a metrics or an observability system and say, is the error rate within this threshold?
Yeah, that's right. So rollout has some implementation of some most complex use cases again. So as you said, typically if you do canary deployment, you want to grab some metrics and compare before deployment and after deployment metrics and make some decision and proceed. And so instead of asking each and every user to write a bash script to do it, rollout gives you first-class support for various metrics providers like Prometheus, obviously, Datadog, and you can just write, some expression that's specific to that provider. And you can, for example, compare error rate before and after deployment. And in addition to that, we had to build some support for, again, well-known edge cases. So, for example, if you use a tool, maybe you heard about it, like Kayenta, it's kind of built for Java applications. And the reason is, in the world of Java, when you're comparing previous and new version of code, you're supposed to start a fresh instance of your application. Because if your Java application ran for a month, it would give you a very different set of metrics from the application that you started just now, even if it uses the same code. And so, and we had internal users who needed Kayenta. And that's why we had to build things like experiment in rollout. So experiment let you basically start a fresh copy of an application, and you're free to choose which version of your application you want to use, and your choice is previous or let's say stable and the new one. So you can run them side by side, collect metrics, and make decision. And that's just one example of such features. So basically, rollout has, I think, a dozen of such well-known cases that you want to use if you do progressive delivery.
But that's super interesting, Alex. I hadn't actually thought that deep level because I've played around with the analysis in Argo Rollouts, and it's super interesting in that we can specify the thresholds and we can look at all the classic golden signals, right, in terms of latency and errors, all these kind of things. But you just made me think the Java example you gave there, running an experiment, because Java relies on JIT compilation. So if it's been running a long time, it's going to be optimized to the use case. But obviously, if you want to do a fair comparison with an improved version of the app, you want them both starting the same time. So Argo Rollouts opens up that use case.
Yes, and I feel like basically maybe that's the reason why these features unlikely ever going to make it into Kubernetes because they're so opinionated. I think to accept it into such big project as Kubernetes, it would take several years of validation, and we were free to add it into Argo CD. Maybe one day these features of Argo Rollouts could be eventually be part of Kubernetes deployment.
So we mentioned Argo Rollouts there. There's a custom resource called Rollouts that replaces deployment. With Argo CD, I believe there's an application custom resource. That's the main template for defining how we would think about an application within Argo CD?
It didn't have to be a custom resource. Like application is just a configuration of Argo CD that explains which set of resources you want to manage, and it points to a Git repository that has your intention. Basically, when you create an application, you're supposed to say, here is my Git repo and some folder in that repo, and it has a set of resources. I want Argo CD to inject these resources into a certain namespace in some Kubernetes cluster. That's it. And we chose to use CRD to store that setting simply because we want to make Argo CD as lightweight as possible. So our choices were to bring our own database or just use Kubernetes. And because Argo CD is for managing Kubernetes, you can safely assume user already has a Kubernetes cluster, so it was obvious choice. We just chose to use CRD as a database. And it brings some additional benefits. Basically, Argo CD can manage itself. We do it like in production. Basically, we have Argo CD that has an Argo CD application. That application points to a set of manifests that has Argo CD deployments as well as set of applications. And then you can make a change in Git, create one more application, for example. Argo CD will notice it and it will apply that configuration and change its own set of settings.
Very cool. It's almost like an Inception type moment there, right? Argo CD controlling Argo CD.
That's right. And it works really well. If you ever visit Argo CD GitHub repo, you will notice there is a link to a public Argo CD instance that we use for demo and for testing. And this is an example of such Argo. So it's Argo that's continuously redeploying itself and it runs tip of master of GitHub, public GitHub repo.
That's very cool. That is very cool. So I'm thinking broader picture now. I really like your take on simplifying certain workflows within Kubernetes. So you mentioned like you can make the assumption that everyone's got Kubernetes running. I'm thinking for things like Argo rollouts, you're going to be making some assumptions around, say, ingress or service-to-service communication. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, as in, I guess Argo rollouts has to integrate into various API gateways, ingresses, and maybe service meshes too?
That's true, yes. Argo Rollouts started with a very simple use case that didn't require integration with any service mesh. It was blue-green deployment. And in case of blue-green, like in the beginning, it was enough to simply interact with built-in Kubernetes services. And then later on, when we introduced Canary, basically, in case of Canary, you want to do fine-grained traffic management. And basically, services are not longer enough. And that's why, yes, Argo integrates with various service mesh implementations. It supports SMI. So SMI, as you might know, it's like an interface available in Kubernetes. And you can install different implementations that supports SMI. But it's not enough. And basically, Argo has first-class support of most popular meshes like Istio and Linkerd and others. This is territory which I'm not so much aware of. But I think it's already like not a dozen, but at least it's more than 4, I think, more than 4 integrations. And what Argo Rollouts does, basically in it, Argo Rollouts CRD, you can configure how much you want your Canary deployment to serve and how much traffic should go to stable, and Argo Rollout will try to modify whatever objects control your service mesh. It will try to make your intention true, basically. So if you use Istio, it will go and check. You will have to provide link to a virtual service, and Rollout will go and do modifications in a virtual service object.
Interesting. So I could definitely see the vision of Argo CD and Argo rollouts providing that sort of layer of simplification, or more correctly, I guess, the correct abstraction for developers. Because a lot of Kubernetes stuff, I think, has been built with operators in mind, platform people, sysadmins. And what I'm hearing from yourself is a lot of the effort, I think, around Argo, CD, and rollouts, say, is defining the correct abstractions and then mapping that declared state in the abstraction into the actual mechanics of Kubernetes and service meshes, things like that. Would that be fair?
I think it's fair, yes. And I feel like it's fair about almost every Kubernetes project that's, Kubernetes provided that model and we are now just trying to, use it and implement it.
Yeah, I like it. What's your experience? Are developers happy working with Kubernetes custom resources with YAML? Because, back in my day, I was doing a lot of XML work, right, in Java, and I hated XML. And now I hate YAML. I'm kind of curious. Do you think developers are happy with dealing with these kind of slightly more operational concepts?
I think it basically depends on what you compare it to. I know that a lot of users are really happy because developers who want to have more control and they want to maybe do rapid experimentation, they extremely happy about Kubernetes. But you also have a different kind of developers. If you have a company and every team is building a small microservice, which doesn't have so much of complex infrastructure, and for these developers, basically, you do not want to have 100 experts in your company. It's enough to have a few. And so for these developers, maybe Kubernetes is not the perfect state. And they're basically looking for more like Heroku-like experience where you have less control. I can understand it, but I would not call these developers unhappy. They're really the benefits that Kubernetes provides.
Yeah. What do you think in the future, Alex? Do you think that we will get to Heroku-like experience for Kubernetes?
I see that a lot of things happening in the community, like Alibaba and Microsoft, they're driving open application model. And I think that's very promising. And basically something like that is needed, but it's a slippery slope. And basically, so far I saw it kind of two directions. One is to try to abstract Kubernetes away and expose something less complex, but because it's less complex, it's less flexible. And so that basically transition from sooner or later applications outgrow this simplified model and they want more controls. And then they have to go through painful migration and migrate to just back to deployments and services. So I'm hoping that one day a project will be created that implements a nice compromise between two. Like you can work with high-level abstraction, but at the same time, you still have access to complex configurations of Kubernetes as needed. But I don't think that project exists already. So maybe it will be one more project of Argo, who knows?
You heard it here first. Brilliant, brilliant. It's always tricky. Something I took away in my programming career is this notion of mechanical sympathy, right? Sort of even if I couldn't build a processor, I knew about time slicing. I knew sort of fundamental things. If I wrote my code a certain way, I would get better performance. And I think there's a danger sometimes, right? If we try and hide Kubernetes or certain things from developers, they may not write the best applications. I'd be kind of curious to get your thoughts on that because distributed systems are hard, right?
Yes, I think you're totally right. Yes, if you hide features of Kubernetes from developers, maybe you will make people who don't need any of these complex features, maybe you will make these people happier. But others who really need these features, basically they would view your platform as it's standing in their way. And we internally at Intuit, we have a lot of such users as well. We have power users who just enjoying to have access to be able to create services and deployments. And, I saw very complex applications that Argo CD user interface provides you this visualization. And typically the hierarchy of resources won't even fit into a big 24-inch screen.
Wow.
So yeah, applications are quite big and complex.
Yeah. When you get to a big organization, there's clearly going to be a range of skills and a range of requirements, isn't there? And catering to all of them is really hard.
Yes, I agree. But at the same time, I feel like Intuit is going through the journey. Our first bit was that we expected that every engineer eventually going to learn Kubernetes. At least we didn't expect everyone to learn how to run Kubernetes, but we expected everyone to understand how to use Kubernetes. And I felt very confident in that idea. After several years, I'm no longer that confident. And the reason is, fortunately or unfortunately, Kubernetes keep evolving. And basically, it's impossible to learn it. You have to kind of keep learning new things all the time. Like new things get introduced, and that possesses a problem. Eventually, developers get tired of it. And what we ended up doing is we have a whole team that what they do, they build tools that scan definitions of manifests in all the repos in the company and look for things that may be wrong or maybe have to be improved. And then they send a set of automated pull requests that trying to improve things.
Oh, awesome.
So it's not perfect. Basically, we now understand that some kind of abstraction needed. And I guess that eventually will be the next step, at least at Intuit, to try to abstract away or provide some least painful way to abstract away a little bit of Kubernetes and, bring some automation to manage Kubernetes clusters.
I like that, Alex. I like that. Yeah, that's very interesting. Out of curiosity, do the platform teams provide training and teaching, or are developers expected to learn Kubernetes on their own?
We have a whole team that provide teaching, and basically leads of every division of platform team usually drive this. So for example, I have to give repeatedly talks about Argo CD and someone else talk about workflows and rollouts internally. And even that is not enough. We also have so-called dev patterns, basically a set of Git repositories that collects the most, not obvious things, the most well-known things. You don't have to manage Kubernetes deployments, Kubernetes resources just using plain YAML. There are a set of tools like Helm, Customize. And so internally we chose Customize and we provide a set of customized remote bases, basically just a bunch of folders stored in Git. And we encourage developers to use one of these instead of starting from scratch every time. So what we do, we basically every time we see that, we know that in the new version of Kubernetes, now deployment is supposed to have readiness gates, for example. And so we can put the readiness gates into the remote customer space, and then we would just ask developers to upgrade to a new version, just bump the Git tag reference to that Git remote customer base.
Oh, that's super interesting, Alex. So you've got almost a template system. So you say, here's a template, copy this, crypt from this, and put it into your own. But not only that, you've got a way to keep that template up to date.
Exactly. Yeah, it gives us opportunity to improve it over time. And Git helps us to deliver it safely. So developer can increment the version and then just use Argo CD to visualize the difference.
Oh, nice.
And at least get a glance and understand what is going to be changed. And then just click sync button.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, I'm getting the picture now, because when I'm teaching Argo CD, I always show the diff, declared state or desired state and what's actually in the cluster. And that's a great way to understand, there's a security update to the deployment stanza, or you say new config goes in, but developers, they don't have to worry too much about understanding the YAML details or the command line. They just can look at it in Argo CD and just understand the differences. And with support from the platform team saying, this is the reason why we've done these things, it's an easy choice for the developers to make.
Exactly. Yes. These automated PRs, they obviously have explanation, and platform team would make sure that PR explains that this change is required because of that and that reason. And then developers, they know that change came from platform team, so they can trust us, and there's explanation. And this way they also learn that new things was created and happened in Kubernetes. And that's why at the moment when they have to upgrade, they also have to at least a little bit understand about the change that happened.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that comes nicely back to sort of the conversation we had around mechanical sympathy. As a developer, just understanding enough about Kubernetes so that you can say, yeah, that change looks good.
Exactly.
Very cool. That's very cool. Well, I know we're coming close to the time here, conscious of that. I'd love to get the quick overview of where do you see the Argo projects going? What's the roadmap? What's exciting for you in the world of Argo?
Yes, so I think Argo got so big so that it's hard to speak about the whole Argo. And so we have to speak about each and every project independently. I know that Argo CD is not even close to feature complete. We have still a lot of plans going forward. So one of the choices we've made when we started Argo, we decided that each and every project is going to be focused on one use case. So we do not want to bloat them a lot. And that's why Argo CD is going to be focused on continuous deployment use case using Git as a source of truth. But we also realized that there are a lot of things you want to do with Argo CD. For example, things like notifications, things like integration with Git. And basically, we're working more actively now on creating so-called ecosystem projects. So in addition to Argo Proj, we have a different GitHub org called Argo Labs, and it's a collection of such projects. And every project in github.com Argo Proj Labs, every such project, you can expect a good quality. Basically, it's also maintained by community and maintainers, and you will see more of such projects in that GitHub organization. And Argo CD also has a lot of plans. We still plan to make a lot of changes in the Argo CD core. So we wanted to not transform it into Kubernetes dashboard, but basically introduce more Kubernetes ecosystem, getting more and more custom resources. And Argo CD started from providing you just base visualization. Basically, you can see a YAML definition of a custom resource. You can see maybe, well-known fields of that resource. But apparently it's not enough. And now in the upcoming release, we want to bring custom visualization for custom resources, starting from rollout. And you might see it pretty much very soon. So idea that you might not know it, but basically rollout has its own dashboard.
Yeah, I've seen it.
And you can launch that dashboard as a standalone component, on your laptop. And we just want to bring exact same UI into Argo CD UI.
Ah, nice.
So that you can click on rollout resource and you would see a visualization specific to rollout. We were forced to do it because Intuit heavily uses both CD and rollout. So benefit is kind of obvious, but we're building in a way so every other Kubernetes resource can eventually be visualized in Argo CD.
That's interesting.
I know that Argo CD users are going to be happy to see it. And another set of enhancements we are working on is, so right now Argo CD has first-class support for custom config management tools like Helm and Customize. And at the same time, I think we have a dozen open feature requests to introduce first-class support for Tanka. Basically, there are a lot of other config management tools. And it's a tough choice for us. It's hard for us to provide good support for all possible config management tools. And so instead, we decided to build a mechanism that will provide that support through customization, basically. We already have a poor man's support for config management plugins, but it's not as good as first-class support of config management tools, and we want to improve it and make the end-user experience as good as first-class support. Hopefully that makes sense. These are two very big things that we are going to work on in Argo CD, I guess, in the next quarter.
That's super exciting, Alex. I'll be honest, for me, Argo CD is very complete. And until talking to you, I wouldn't have thought there'd be lots of other things needed to be doing. So that's great to hear that the project's super active and you're constantly improving it. That's fantastic.
I feel like, it's good and bad. We have several directions that we can go. What I mentioned is both features that I mentioned. It's about this typical, big company use case where you have a lot of users and a platform team that is taking care of these users. And kind of you want to make life of these users as easy as possible. And so you need to provide these UI features and support more config management tools. It's all great. But at the same time, we have a completely different set of users who are asking for simplicity.
Yeah.
Keep saying, let's not worry about that. Can you make experience easier? Like, let's say if you are a small team and you're all admins of your cluster and you want to just manage your cluster, and if you go ahead and try to install Argo CD, you have to immediately start to worry about built-in Argo CD users, SSO. And for these people, it's like, what the hell? Like, why do I have to worry about it? So we're trying to improve this as well. So in the upcoming 2.1 release, we are introducing Argo CD headless mode. Sorry for that name. That's the best we come out with. But idea that it's a new way to install Argo CD. And once you install it in a headless mode, basically, you don't have to worry about access control because Argo CD no longer will be available outside of a cluster. Basically, there is no UI, no API, but you still can get user interface locally through Argo CD CLI. Basically, it will just use port forwarding to connect to the Kubernetes cluster directly, and UI will be running locally. So there are a lot of different directions the project is going on right now, simultaneously, kind of.
Yeah, it sounds like it, yeah.
It's hard to say, what is the most prominent feature on the roadmap. I feel like there are a lot of equally great features coming in new releases.
That's super exciting, Alex. Super exciting to hear. Yeah, great stuff. If folks want to follow along for the project or follow along for your work, what's the best way? Follow folks on Twitter, on LinkedIn? What's the best thing?
Yes, I believe Twitter and our Medium blog. Yes, we're very active on Twitter. We're trying to publish news that we see in the community. A lot of end users, they publish blogs about how they use Argo, and we typically retweet it in Argo Twitter. And we use Argo Medium blog, so it's blog.argoapproach.io. We use blogs as a way to talk to our users and explain what new features are coming. And this is our way to broadcast the changes. And if you want to talk to us directly, please join CNCF Slack. And we have channels for Argo CD, workflows, rollouts, and even a set of more specific channels. Like we already have some channels per feature. So the example is Argo CD. I would not call it a feature, per ecosystem project. So one of the projects I really like, there is a project called Argo CD Autopilot. So it's a CLI tool, a repository with Kubernetes manifest in a meaningful way. So it will scale when you get into production. And we have channel where people discuss this particular ecosystem project.
Perfect. It sounds like the Kubernetes Slack is a good place. I'm often there myself. The community is fantastic there, right? So I think if folks want to get involved, go onto the Slack channel, have a look through the various Argo channels and reach out there, yeah?
Yes, that's fair.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Alex. It's really been fun.
Thank you.